Well, that was a stimulating start. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. It's my privilege and honor to introduce our third-time loyal Zeitgeist thought leader, moderator, facilitator, and a good friend, Chrystia Freeland, who's going to be the host for the next few sessions. Chrystia is the managing director of the FT in the United States, and she's a great scholar herself.
Come on up. My panel is going to join me here. I was really thrilled when Nikesh invited me to come here for the third year in a row. Like all of you, I attend many, many conferences, and I have to say this is my favorite one. It's extremely well organized, and what I have always really enjoyed about the Zeitgeist conferences is the content is really excellent. There are terrific panelists, and I think the subjects, so far in my experience, have really been right on the issues of the moment. And that is particularly true, I think, of our starting panel, which is about emerging markets and risk and reward. I've just arrived. I live in New York, and I arrived here last night from Kiev, where I spent many years as a reporter and just a few days recently. And what was really interesting for me about being there was the risk-reward balance. We're accustomed to thinking about emerging markets as being the really risky place. But if you compare the level of anxiety among bankers in Kiev with bankers in New York, I gotta say my current hometown, New York, is feeling a lot more anxious and a lot more worried about risk. And when I talked to the Kiev bankers, the first thing they wanted to say to me was, we don't have any subprime. We didn't buy any of those toxic American products. We're safe, cautious people. So I think when we're thinking about emerging markets, particularly today, this whole notion of it being the West teaching other people, that whole issue of balance has really been turned on its head. The first person on our panel today is Jami Miscik. Jami, I know from Lehman Brothers, where she works right now, is the most popular speaker at Lehman events. And I have to tell you, certainly speaking for myself, usually you have to be a lot richer than I am to be allowed to hear what Jami has to say. She runs global risk for Lehman, and before that she worked at the CIA, rising to be deputy director of intelligence. One of her jobs was briefing the president every day in his daily intelligence briefing. So I hope that's a little bit of what we're going to get today. They say about newspapers and journalists that the moment when all of you lose your faith in journalists, in newspapers, is when you read a story about something that you actually know about. I'm sure everyone here has had that experience. I sometimes feel that way about analysts at fancy investment banks. As soon as you talk to them about something you really know, they lose all credibility. And when I first met Jami, I asked her about Ukraine, which I do know something about. I have to say she turned out to know much more about it than I do, and that was only one of the 15 countries she discussed with me in that conversation. So I'm really delighted to have her. What we're going to do in this format is we're going to talk to each one of our panelists for 10 minutes and then have a discussion with them and with all of you. So Jami goes first, and one thing that we were talking about earlier this morning was Jami felt a really important moment in this relationship between emerging markets and the rest of the world was the meeting last week of the foreign ministers of the BRIC countries. Why is that significant?
Well, I think it's interesting. You know, I think are all in agreement that this unipolar moment has kind of passed in the world. It was an anomaly. It was always going to change. You know, the Soviet Union fell apart. The U.S. was kind of left in a position of prominence for the last 20 years, but that's really changing. I think that part's in agreement. What's interesting to me, though, is that there's still a sense, I believe, on the part of the developed world, that it's up to the governments of the developed world to bestow permission on some of these developing countries to either be included in the UN Security Council in terms of the number of seats that have the veto, or to expand the G8 to be the G10 to get India and China in. What was interesting to me is that the BRICS are just doing it for themselves. And so for the first time, they had a standalone meeting of the foreign ministers last week in Russia, and they talked about the issues that were important to them. They make up 12% of the world's GDP right now. That's up from 8% just 8 years ago. And they have another meeting planned of the economic and finance ministers this fall in Brazil. So I think it's just interesting that they are not waiting for the developed world to say, oh yes, please come join our club, or we'll give you the opportunity to do this. They understand that they are decision makers, they're players, they can decide things for themselves. Now, I absolutely think those international institutions need to adjust to accommodate
so when
that.
Gordon Brown talks about changing the
Absolutely.
international institutions, maybe he's not going to be the guy who decides how they change?
He won't be the only guy who decides how they change. There'll be a lot of voices. And they want to be there as decision makers, not just as voices at the table, but as deciders.
And is that a change?
I think the stepping out on their own, it demonstrates a confidence that has grown, and that is a change. I think it's a change for the good. I don't think any of this is a change that we should be fearful of. I think it's something that we should embrace, try and figure out how that's going to impact the world moving forward as we know it. But I thought it was a significant meeting.
One issue that the Prime Minister raised and which came up in questions is higher commodity prices. What impact is that having on geopolitics and on these relations between countries?
You know, I think this is one of the biggest issues that I've focused on for the last 6 or 9 months now. And it actually started back last summer with Mexico, when they started having what we were calling the tortilla riots. The price of maize had gone up 400%. The Mexican government did what it normally does. It tries to get more supply. Turned to the U.S., found out that the corn had gone into ethanol and wasn't available to alleviate the situation. What's really dramatic for me is the link between the increase in food prices and the increase in potential for unrest and instability around the world. This isn't a food crisis like Ethiopia was a food crisis, where it was fairly contained to a certain area that could be rectified by aid going in. We've been keeping a database. There are more than 40 countries around the world that have had major unrest as it relates to food issues. These are emerging markets that actually really matter to the world's economy. Mexico, Argentina, Egypt, Indonesia, the Philippines, India, parts of China. I mean, the list goes on and on. And if there's anything that is a fundamental between a government and its people, it's the social contract to provide security. And in a lot of these countries, that means access to affordable food. You know, if you're in the US, you only spend 9% of your income on food. If you're in France, it's maybe 14%. If you're in some of these developed countries, and especially amongst the poor, it's 50%. And if you add in the price of fuel, the fuel increases that we were talking about earlier, it goes to 60 and 75%. There's no margin for the spiraling prices. And so the potential to take out frustration on governments grows. And I think that's what governments in a lot of these countries are very concerned about.
And how will we see them responding?
Well, the governments are trying to do a whole host of things. For the importing countries, they are frantically seeking supplies. You've seen President Arroyo of the Philippines go out and try and get rice deliveries guaranteed to the country. They're lowering their tariff barriers. They're increasing their subsidies. But on the same side, on the opposite side of the same question, you have the exporting countries putting constraints on how much can be exported because they want to make sure that they don't run into trouble at home and that they keep the secure amount of food stocks for their own people. So I think this can be a real rallying cry, could be a real catalyst for people. We've seen one government fall already in Haiti as a result of rising prices, and I think you could see others. And certainly you see governments being concerned that there could be others.
Okay, Jami, let's imagine each one of us is the president. What's on our briefing this morning, and what's the thing that you're going to tell us we should be the most worried about?
Well, a presidential briefing is made up usually of a couple different pieces. One is something has happened in the world overnight that you need to know about, and here's our take on it. In that case, I suspect they're probably briefing on the ongoing relief efforts for the earthquake in China, the status of getting food supplies into Myanmar, and the like. Then there's a piece of the briefing that might be, you asked us about this before, here's the update. So perhaps it would be the transition to power in Russia. How's it going? Where do they stand?
And you would say?
On that one, I would say that...
Just in two minutes or so, because we're running out of time.
Here's what I would say. Putin in his final days did a little bit of a soft transfer of power. Some of the powers that used to be with the presidency now reside with the prime minister. Not big things, but interesting things. Some of the things include that governors now report to him, not to the presidency. So Russia has no history of power sharing, not during Tsar days, not during Soviet days. This will be a test. There is a good relationship between Putin and Medvedev. He is his protege. That probably helps to a point. But if you're the number two and you become the number one, I don't think you should ever assume that how he acted as number two is how he will act as number one. I mean, everyone wants their breakout move. Everyone wants to establish themselves. His formative experiences are much different than Putin's. He was a lawyer when the Soviet Union came apart. He may actually focus on restoring the rule of law or beginning to try and establish a rule of law in Russia, which would be, I think, an advantage to most of us in the room. So I would say the jury is still out, but this is not a comfortable power-sharing arrangement given the history of the country.
And do you put in that briefing one thing we should be worried about as presidents that we all are?
You know, I think unless there is a real crisis that he has to worry about, you often don't. You don't put that on his agenda because you realize how much a leader of any country has on their shoulders. You really want to choose your moments carefully. You want to make sure that if there's not a crisis right now, he doesn't have to deal with it, you don't raise it. But clearly things like the water issue that we were talking about, for a long term, this would be the Saturday morning briefing when you go up to Camp David and you go into a little bit more detail on a given subject.
So there's scarier stuff on Saturday morning than other
There's
days?
more in depth. We got lots of time for the long term issue. We're going to talk about water today and the competition for that in the future. So.
Okay, now we're going to bring Luiz Fernando Furlan into the conversation. Luiz is a chemical engineer by training. We discovered he shares this background with Viktor Koo. So clearly that's what you have to get your kids to study if you want them to be successful in emerging markets. He went on to a career of about 30 years in food processing in Brazil. 30 years. And then the president decided that he needed a fabulous salesman. So he brought Luiz into the government. Luiz has now moved on to, I think, an even more difficult and more exciting sales project. He is running a big conservation mission in Amazonas. And the idea is to try to persuade the world and Brazilians that you can make money from conservation. He's going to start his presentation with a few slides designed to give us a sense of where the money and where the resources are and the people in the world today and where they're moving. And then I'll ask him a couple of questions.
Yes, well, thank you very much. I brought some charts in order that we can see what is going on in the world. So, no, back, yeah. Well, this is the well-known geography of the world. But if you move and you see the purchasing power parity by 2002, and it's slightly different, the map. Also, if you see what is going on by 2015, it will be quite different than 2002. I will show back. See, quite a difference. See what happens in Asia. And the US is shrinking in terms of comparison. Then you see a number of people with per capita income below $10 a day. Africa is big, North America is tiny. But then you see number of people with $200 a day. See, Africa is almost disappearing there. And you see that US is a little fat. Then, number of patents by 2002 that is related to technology. You see, Africa is almost disappearing, and also South America. And Japan is over there. It's not China, it's Japan. Then you see the world population in 2050, where the population is by 2050, maybe where the consumers are in the future. Then you see water availability. I believe that some commodities, some products that we are taking for free, like air and water, will not be free in the future, because that is related to food. So you can see where is the food in the future. And in that case, South America is one of the points. The water use, if you see the comparison of where is the water and who is using water. And then you see, well, yeah, highway network that is related to logistics and also for transportation of food and other products, railway, and also the oil exports. You can see that by 2002, I see South America with Venezuela, but very shortly you will see Brazil being a net exporter of oil. We are today more or less self-sufficient already in oil. Greenhouse gas emissions. Where is the pollution coming from? And that's all. So that is just an idea. I wonder for the next Zeitgeist, I will bring comparison about food production and food consumption. That will be interesting to see what is going on. But at the end, as it was told, I embraced the new project for the conservation of the Amazon rainforest. And I've been to the Amazon region last week.
Well, I want to ask you about that. I hope Nikesh has noted that Luiz has invited himself to next year, so please find a place on the agenda. I know that you're a fabulous salesman, but how can you possibly sell conservation to people in Brazil? The slides that you've shown us have shown us that there is a huge disparity in consumption in the world. And isn't it normal, even just, for people in poorer countries to aspire to the kind of standard of living, the level of consumption that those fat Americans, of whom I guess I live there, I'm now one, that we enjoy?
Well, we are focusing our projects that involve 17 million hectares of conservation of rainforest. That is the size more or less like UK. And this is a wild 34 conservation units. And we are convincing people and authorities that the forest, the trees up, can have a better value than the trees down.
How is that possible?
That is possible if you transform the benefits, economic benefits of the forest in order that you can have products and services that will allow people to have a better life there without destroying the forest. One of the research that we are doing there is to analyze the forest, the mature forest, what is the absorption of carbon. And the first figures that are now available show that 600 kilos per year per hectare of the mature forest of carbon is absorbed. In that way, if somebody wants to pay for that income will be used for the benefit of the populations there in order they can explore, let us say, fruits and fisheries and some
when you
other.
say somebody, you mean, for example, a guest at a Marriott hotel. This is one of your
Yeah,
projects, right?
we
So
signed,
how does that work?
Yeah, we signed an agreement with Marriott 1 month ago, and they will be paying an amount of money per year for us, and they will be offering to the guests to offset their carbon emissions during their trips, voluntary. So that money will be used to put schools, to train people, to settle small plants, to use roots and leaves, and maybe industrializing nuts, that people can get a decent job and make money with committed that they will not cut trees.
So is the idea that if people in rich countries want the rainforest to be preserved, we have to pay for it?
In some way, not only in rich countries, also in Brazil. We made an agreement with the largest private bank in Brazil, and they are offering products like credit cards and funds that the persons that buy those products will be contributing for the foundation also. I hope that we can do something with Google also. In order
I was waiting for you to come to that point. I thought this would not be cost-free for...
No, it's profitable for Google because we imagine that you can buy a piece of land virtually in the Amazon region, and through Google Earth you can say what is going on in your piece of land. So you'll be contributing for the conservation, and you have the pleasure to see that it is there, untouchable.
Fantastic. Good. It's a really good pitch. Now, Jami told us that particularly in poorer countries, this question of rising food prices is a really, really hot political issue. Is that true for Brazil? And what should your colleagues in government be doing?
First of all, we are not a poor country.
Poorer.
Yeah, and even that. We are a very rich country and maybe unexplored. And we are one of the providers of food for the world.
So food prices are not an issue for Brazil?
That's not a problem for us. We can increase our production. We are using only 50% of the arable land of our country without touching the Amazon region. So we could double our production of grains and food and meats without harming the environment.
Gordon Brown is really worried about the rise of protectionist sentiment in Western countries. Aaron pointed out, I think quite rightly, that protectionism is such a huge issue in the US presidential campaign. How are people in Brazil feeling about globalization and global trade?
You know, what is happening today is that for a long time, food prices were more or less stable. I recall the first time I went to US, it was 1965. I went to New York to the Waldorf Astoria, and the room rate was $32 per night. And the Coke machines were selling Coke can at $0.25. And the ton of soybeans at that time, it was $180. So a farmer could spend a week at the Waldorf Astoria and a lot of Cokes with 1 ton of soybeans. 2 years ago, I went to the Waldorf Astoria. The room rate was $600. The Coke machines, no Coke machines at the Waldorf Astoria anymore, but along the streets, $1.25. And a ton of soybeans, $200. So a farmer could stay maybe 8 hours at the Waldorf Astoria and no Cokes. So what is happening today?
But a ton of soybeans today.
What is happening today? Soybean prices went to $450, maybe $500. Even they cannot stay one night at the Waldorf Astoria. So it's being balanced along the years. So food prices are at this level today to stay. And that is, it's good because the offer of food worldwide will improve. And that will benefit everybody.
Well, I'm glad to conclude on that note. My dad is a farmer. He grows oilseed crops, and he doesn't stay in the Waldorf Astoria when he visits me in New York. He still stays in my living room. But he took me out to supper the last time he came to visit. So he's feeling much more flush than before. In our very speedy world tour, we're moving from Brazil to China. Very, very delighted to have Viktor Koo here. His electrical engineering training has served him in chemical engineering, has served him in very good stead to become an internet entrepreneur, of course. After going to Berkeley and Stanford, he worked in San Francisco for a while and then went on to really become one of the leading pioneers of the internet in China. He was involved in one of the founders of Soho, and now runs the Chinese Youku. I was really excited in reading the FT, which I have to say over the past few days, if you've read the FT closely, as I hope you have, it's been kind of like an agenda for this conference. In addition to a profile of Nikesh today and a big story about Brazil and the environmental issues there, in our man of the news was Wen Xiaobao, And in the profile of him, several times we cited the internet sites that Victor has created. So I want to ask you, in the response to the Chinese earthquake, what role has the internet played, and in particular internet video, and how has that been different from the way that disasters in China have had an impact, have been responded to by society?
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here. In terms of the earthquake that happened last Monday, it certainly was the biggest earthquake for China over the last 30 years. And I also read the FT article you mentioned on my flight out here in Beijing, and talked a
little bit of advertising.
And talked about Premier Wen Jiabao's very proactive approach, as well as very positive public opinion of the fast response, as well as the very humanistic approach. And in many ways, besides television, the internet was really the primary information vehicle for creating that kind of public opinion. The important thing to note is that out of the 210 million internet users in China, most of them are in the urban areas. And out of the 1.3 billion people in China, actually 350 million are in urban cities. So as you can imagine, 210 million out of the 350 is already a very high penetration, and is a very, very direct dissemination of information. Now, related to the earthquake, I think a couple of things is important of note. Last week, clearly, that was the most important topic for Chinese internet users. To give an example, within Youku, we had about 11,000 videos uploaded on our website about the earthquake, and the first one being only 10 minutes after the first earthquake. And over a 24-hour period of time, we had about 12 different provinces of videos coming out to our website. I think what
impact does that have on the politics?
Well, I think overall it's a much more timely as well as a transparent way of communicating information. Besides CCTV, I would argue, which is the national broadcaster in China, the most influential media in China right now probably would be the top two portals, which would be Sohu and Sina. And in terms of creating public opinion, or in terms of rallying support for something like the earthquake, sites like Sohu and Youku, leading websites, are rallying as well as communicating these messages about what's happening on the ground, and creating a lot of interest for people to donate, as well as rally behind the reconstruction as well as the rescue efforts. In fact, starting from today, the next 3 days is a national mourning period for the earthquake. If you go to all the top websites in China right now, if you come to Youku today, we're all in black and white. Everything is in black and white. And we have actually screened out all our entertainment content. We will do this for 3 entire days. And this is the importance of what's happening in China, and how serious this is, and how internet has played a role in terms of information around the earthquake.
How open and free can that discussion be, though? I mean, you know, the internet we tend to see as a medium as being something that fosters openness and democracy,
Sure.
But we worry in China that it's censored, and maybe even that Western companies ought not to be engaged. So is it? Is it open?
I think in many ways, the perception you see in the international media and what we see actually in reality within China, content censorship is an issue, but it's actually a lot more open than what people can imagine. If you come to websites like ourselves, you can actually find a lot of a wide variety of different kind of content. We do maintain regular communication with the government in relations to major societal issues like the earthquake or major...
Have they told you can't post certain things about it?
Well, with this incident, I think what's happening within Sichuan, actually there weren't a lot of videos that could come out from the area because of devastation. But in terms of videos around rallying support, as well as people really talking about their feelings towards the earthquake, there was certainly a lot of videos. Like I said, there are 11,000 videos about the earthquake in a 7-day period. So there's a tremendous amount of information that's also readily available that wasn't available before.
And what if, I don't know, a grieving parent wanted to post a video saying this is the government's fault for building substandard buildings, corrupt officials didn't spend enough on school construction? Could they post something like that on Youku?
Well, I think no one has done so, but that's And certainly, I think in this time of tragedy, most people are really focusing on the rescue and reconstruction efforts, and certainly a difficult time. And we're really trying to think about it from a positive angle, from a charity standpoint, as well as from a reconstruction standpoint.
That's a very politic answer. How about the Olympics?
Sure.
What role do you think the internet will play in the coverage of the Olympics, maybe even of the protests around it? How are you bracing yourself for that?
In fact, before the earthquake, the most covered topic over the last few months have been the Olympic relay, especially once it entered China. And we had videos actually all related to the Olympics relay, even beginning from Greece, actually. We were surprised the number of overseas Chinese that were uploading videos that are related to it. I guess the difference is that comparing to CNN, for example, the angle that you will see in terms of sentiment is very, very different, as you can imagine. And there's also a feeling within the Chinese users in terms of the perception in the international media that what is happening within Tibet and so forth, and the history of Tibet is misinterpreted and very misconstrued, I think, in international media. And
Evil Western journalists to blame, as usual.
well, I think it's just really open and transparent conversation. I think a fair conversation is what probably is required. And from that standpoint, what's different about this Olympics, I was also involved in the 2004 Athens Olympics, and there were text and picture available for the internet. But this is really the first time, I think, for the internet, where people will be watching the Olympics on television as well as the internet. And this is a lot of attention that's being focused. And Sohu.com is also the first time where an internet company has become an internet sponsor for the Olympics as well. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what it is from an official standpoint, as well as what we call citizen video. We're also soliciting and helping users that are uploading videos that are related to the Olympic relay, as well as during the 2-3 week period of the Olympics, about how users and how citizens view the Olympics and things that are around the Olympics.
I have one quick final question. Sure. Nikesh has already told us that Europeans are as innovative as Americans. They just don't brag about it as much. So what about China? When are we going to have a Chinese Google?
Well, I think innovation in China is certainly an interesting question. In the past, I think if you look at most of the successful internet companies in China, I would say there have been emulation of models, product models from around the world, whether it's US, Japan, Korea. But if you had to copy those exact models into China, it probably wouldn't work very well. Using online video as an example, if we focus on a user-generated video model very similar to how YouTube has been very successful in the US, wouldn't work very well in China. For example, Youku view ourselves as much as a platform for traditional media as we are for user-generated media, because the traditional media environment in China is very geographically focused and very fragmented. We're talking about hundreds of television stations and thousands of production companies. Now, going forward, though, I think besides emulating these product models, we are also starting to see companies within the internet space also innovating and creating new models. I think notable examples of this would be QQ and Alibaba. And if you look at companies within the wireless value-added service space, as well as the online game space, you also see a lot of innovation that's happening within China that is probably even more advanced than some of the advanced economies as well.
Okay. We now have 10 minutes left for questions. If people want to approach the microphones and ask a question, if you do have a question, if you don't have questions, I'll just keep on asking. So your choice. And if you have a question, if you could address it to a specific panelist, but I will encourage our panel to talk to each other. Any questions? Oh, come on. Yeah, please.
Hello, I'm from Portugal. I'm Francisco Pinto Balsemão. I'd like to ask Minister Furlan if he read in today's papers that there is an intention of limiting the access to Amazon by the Brazilian government creating a sort of passport for Brazilians and for foreigners, and this is being widely criticized by the environmental organizations, correctly in my opinion.
Well, I'm not aware of this idea. I disagree with the idea, and probably that will not be accepted. I was with President Lula last week in Rio, and we spoke about the Amazon region, and the idea is that conservation must create some economic benefits in order to maintain the Amazon region as it is for the next generations. So I believe that many ideas have been appearing about the Amazon region, including that it should have a kind of international organization to take care of the Amazon region, but maybe, as Prime Minister said, an international organization should take care of oil and energy all over, and not related to the local forests. Just to give an idea, if you take the world map of 1,000 years ago and you compare with the world map today, Europe has 0.3% of the forest that used to have 1,000 years ago. North America has 19% due to the reserves of Canada. And Brazil has 60% of the forest that we had 1,000 years ago. So
you don't think it's fair of us to expect you to keep all of yours?
no, we don't think so. We are able to take care of our assets, and the idea that my decision to embrace this area is in order to show to the country and to the world that we can do by ourselves the conservation project, and maybe in the future, as we can be seen as an example for the world in order to care for the environment.
Okay, thank you. Question on the left, please.
Hi. Marco Argenti from Dada. I have a question for Viktor. You mentioned that out of 1.3 billion people, you have about 350,000 in urban areas, of which about 210 have internet access, so which is like a 70% penetration type of thing. So the question is always, how about the rest, right? And some people think that those people will likely access the internet in high percentages via their mobile phones, which is possibly the easiest way to connect certain rural areas, especially in countries, in developing countries or in countries with, large, populations outside urban areas. So my question to you is, how much of that you already see in Yoku, and how much of your uploaders and downloaders are via the mobile phone today, and maybe how it's going to change with the introduction of 3G in China, which is supposedly about to happen very soon. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think in terms of what's happening within China, the 210 million is all fixed line internet users. And I think you're also correct to point out there are over 500 million mobile phone users. Of course, not all of them actually access the mobile internet right now. But in terms of video, currently it's really still online phenomenon, because from a mobile standpoint, in China we're still on 2.5G. And then 3G is probably happening in 09 and 10. So mobile television and mobile video will start emerging in the next 1 or 2 years. But what we do see is actually a lot of phones that are coming out in the next, actually this year, next year, all have video capabilities. And we do actually, out of our user-generated video, I would say probably about 10% of our content is coming from 3GP format mobile video right now.
Any more questions? Okay, well, I have a slightly self-interested question for Luiz and Viktor, which is one of the issues that has emerged this morning is this changing relationship between the richer countries and the emerging markets. And certainly in the US presidential debate, a really powerful and sore point has been this perception by American politicians, the American people, that America's prestige has fallen very low. What would you say in China and in Brazil is the perception of America right now? And if you dare, tell me which American candidate would be the president who would have the best chance of restoring America's role in the world?
Well, that's a tricky question.
Okay, I'll make Luiz go first because he's a politician. So.
I'm not a politician. I served during 4 years as a political.
You can never totally lose that.
Well, what I can say is that in our region, the prestige of the Americans is declining over the years. And what is going on today is that there are several countries with politicians that are speaking against U.S., like Chavez and Morales and some others. And so maybe in the future, the next president should take care better of the region. And one of the issues is related to market access, because most of our products cannot, mainly from agriculture, cannot reach the American market. We can sell to Europe, Japan, all over the world, but not to US. So I'm not sure which one will be the best for our region, because if you take the 15, 20 years ago up to now, there was not an important improvement in the relationship between the US and the South American and Latin American countries. Maybe with Mexico there was an improvement through the NAFTA, and now with Central America. And on the other hand,
one of them clearly more popular in Brazil?
Look, President Bush has been to Brazil twice in the past 4 or 5 years. And his relationship with our president, President Lula, is at the highest level. They relate very well. But he is not popular in Brazil. I'm not sure if he is popular in his own country.
He's not.
So, but at the end, the countries, emerging markets like the BRICS are realizing that being part of the G5 in economic way for the coming 20 or 30 years, US, Russia, India, Brazil, and China. So why we wouldn't relate among ourselves?
It's Jamie's point.
Yeah, because we created this IBSA, that's India, Brazil, and South Africa, 4 or 5 years ago. So I've been to the meetings, presidential meetings, talking what we can do by ourselves. So right now in Russia, we will be representing a large share of the economic market in the near future. So should we expect for a declining power of US in the world, or should we take the lead to move ahead?
So it doesn't really matter who's the president.
We represent the largest share of land, the largest share of people, and will be part of the largest share of economy. So let's move.
Okay, Victor.
I'm an internet
America
entrepreneur, so I'm speaking outside my area of expertise, but it's more like a personal opinion. I think kind of the US-China relations have always been what I describe as a love-hate relationship. In many ways, I think China admires the US in terms of innovation and economic development and so forth. But at the same time, I think China feels very nervous about a country that goes out and start wars around the world, because we are a very peaceful country. And so that's something we're very, very nervous about. And the other thing is kind of the perception of China within the US environment is also something China cares a lot about. And I think to the extent that we can have a president who's open-minded about the relationship to China is probably the most welcome. Now, I'm going to take a gutsy guess here, is out of the 3 candidates, I think, not reflecting any political bias, I think Hillary Clinton may actually be a good bridge, because there's a lot of popularity of Bill Clinton within the China
and notwithstanding her speech about women's rights?
I think out of the three candidates, of course, I think out of the three candidates are all different issues related to the three candidates. And to the extent that I understand, I think that would be a candidate that may make this work.
Okay, Jamie, I'm going to give you very quickly the last word, America's role in the world, and will you hazard a guess as to which president could most successfully restore it?
Is no a good answer? No.
No, that's a very bad answer.
You know, I think the one thing I would just say is America and Americans are an extremely resilient culture. And I don't remember it, but I've got to figure that at the end of the in the worst days of Vietnam, that American popularity in terms of its policies around the world was at a real low. And you know, we may be at a similar low now and maybe at a lower low, but I wouldn't say that's where we stay. So almost whoever comes in as president, I think automatically gets a bump up in the world. Whoever then whatever their policies then become will dictate whether that bump continues to go up, stays where it is, or starts to drop off. I think that probably a Democratic candidate as opposed to a Republican candidate is going to be seen by the world as a bigger change, and therefore may be the more able to build that bridge. But I actually think that there'll be a honeymoon period for either and a bump up for either.
Okay, I think that is a suitably optimistic note on which to end. And in this age of America bashing, nice to have a positive view of America's prospects in the future. I would like to really thank our panel. We've had an incredibly swift tour of the entire world, issues ranging from the environment to technology to geopolitics. You guys have done really well and even answered sensitive political questions. So thank you very, very much. And we'll now have a coffee break, a really short one. This is not my fault. It's actually Nikesha's for going on too long with Gordon Brown. I want to be clear on that. So if you could come back 10 minutes from now at 11:05, that would be great. Thank you very much.